Okay, well, today we are going to learn about George Washington. He is one of our most famous presidents, and he's the first president of the United States. So, we're going to talk about him and we're going to learn about his childhood and who he was. So, we're going to start with this book called Childhood Stories of George Washington. This is going to be about George when he was growing up, when he was about y'all's age. So, you can relate to him. He's going to be doing some fun stuff that y'all do as kids. So, and maybe some things that you don't do because he was born a long time ago in the 1700s. So, let's get reading. Childhood Stories of George Washington. American Folk Tales adapted by Catherine Follett, illustrated by Tad Butler. George Washington was America's first president. You can see this in his picture on the dollar bill. There are many stories about George Washington's childhood. The most famous story is about a cherry tree. One day, George's father gave him a little hatchet. George wanted to try it out. The trees in the woods looked too big. There was a pretty cherry tree in the garden, and George swung the hatchet and chopped down the tree with a crash. Then he went off to play. I don't think any of y'all have ever chopped any trees down, have you? Good. It's not good. It's not safe. George's father was very angry when he saw the tree. "Who cut down my beautiful tree?" he said. If George didn't say anything, no one would know. But George said, "I did. I cannot tell a lie." Is it good to lie? No, it's not good to lie. Do we lie to our parents? Maybe sometimes, but should we? Should we do what George did? Be honest when we mess up? Yeah, I think we should too. Another story is told about a horse. One morning, George went to the stable. He asked the stableman to give him the best horse. The stableman was afraid, and he gave George the horse. George took the horse out and joined the big fox hunt, but the horse hurt its foot. George's mother saw the limping horse. She got very angry at the stableman. She was going to punish him harshly, but George said, "I made him do it, Mother. I made him." Here's another horse story. George's mother had a wild horse and no one knew how to ride it. George and his friends decided to try. Who knows what's going to happen? Raise your hand. Yes. Yes, exactly. It's not going to end good. I don't think so either. So let's read to find out. George hopped on the horse. The horse bucked and tumbled, and George held on tight. But the horse had a bad heart. The horse fell over and couldn't get up. George and his friends were really upset. They didn't want to hurt the horse. And George's mother came home and she asked about the horse. "I'm so sorry I hurt the horse," George said. But George's mother was still mad. But she was also proud of George. It takes a lot of courage to admit when you've done something wrong. And George Washington was very honest. Honesty helped him become America's first president and one of his most favored presidents. So we're going to learn a little bit more about George. So give me 1 second to pull up our PowerPoint. All right. So George Washington. So who can raise their hand and tell me what we just learned about George? Yeah, he did have a horse. He had a mom. He had a stableman. Was he honest or was he a liar? Yeah, he was honest. So this is where George grew up. At age 6, they moved to this place called Ferry Farm. And as you can see, it's really pretty. Has anyone ever been to a farm? Have we seen horses before? Has anyone ridden horses like George Washington did? Yeah, they're really big, and look how pretty his family home was. So George was born February 22nd, 1732 in Westmoreland, Virginia. He started school at 6 when they moved to Ferry Farms, which we just saw in the picture before. And he stopped going to school at age 15 because he had to work. He had a really big family. He had 2 sisters and 3 brothers. That's why George had to work, was because there were so many people to feed, and his family, his parents couldn't afford it. And George had some favorite foods. Who here has some favorite foods? Yeah, I know. My favorite's pizza. So instead of pizza back then, George, his favorite food was mashed sweet potatoes with coconut and green beans with mushrooms. Sounds pretty good to me. As a young adult, George was stopped being schooled at 15, which we talked about. And when he did this, he became a surveyor. And this means a person who travels across lands and goes on these big adventures to make maps. They're also called cartographers, but they make these maps like this one in the picture that's a treasure map. That might not be more what George was making, but George was mapping out the land so that people could travel and know where they were going. At age 22, he became the leader of a militia. A militia is a group of soldiers, and he was the leader. So as the leader, he was telling them where to go, he was helping them know what to do. And less than a year later, at the age 23, which is pretty young, that's even younger, or that's just a little bit older than me. Could you imagine me leading an army? Yeah, I don't think so. And so George controlled all the soldiers in Virginia when he got promoted. So that means that he had a lot of responsibility at a young age. But what's even crazier is they trusted George. And do you think it was because he was honest? Yeah, I think so too. So as an adult, George Washington grew to be one of our biggest presidents. We're not talking fat, we're just talking really big. He was 6'2". And for y'all, that's a foot taller than me. That's like to here. He's like to here on us. Isn't that crazy? And he was 200 pounds. He was one of the most respected generals that we have ever had. And we know this because he was the only general in his time who stayed with the troops in below freezing weather. You know how it's really cold and windy out right now? Well, they used to not have heaters. They didn't have very good blankets. He lived in a little tent on a frozen hill with ice and snow, and it was miserable. But you know what? He stayed there with his troops, where all the other generals just went home, and that their troops stay out there and their soldiers get cold, and they didn't really worry about him. And so George, he's the only man in history in the United States to be elected with 100% of the votes. And this is amazing because he was so well liked for being such a good person. They knew that the United States needed him to be the first president. And we talked about this earlier. Can y'all guess where we have seen him? I'm going to give you a hint. We've seen him everywhere. He's on silver and he's on green. Can we think about this for a second? Raise your hand when you think you know. Yeah. Your parents use it. You might get it for birthdays. Yes. Okay, you go. What do you think it is? That's right. It is on the dollar bill. But you know where else he is? He's on the quarter. So he is the only president to be on the $1 bill and the quarter. And he's the only president to have 2 different currencies. But Abraham Lincoln also is on the $5 bill and the penny. And George Washington's on the $1 bill and the quarter. So isn't that crazy that he is on money? But you know where else he is? Does anyone have any guesses? No guesses? That's okay. You can visit him. He is so important to the creation of America that they carved his face into a mountain. They call this mountain Mount Rushmore. It has 4 of our most special and most honored presidents, such as George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, and Theodore Roosevelt. A fun fact is Thomas Jefferson, who is right here, was good friends with George Washington, and they actually spent a lot of time together. And can you guess how big his head is? Yes, what do you think? 20 feet, that's a good guess. 10 feet, yeah, that's a good guess. It's even bigger. It is 65 feet long. All of their faces are about 60 feet long. Isn't that crazy? So his nose is a foot taller than me, like a foot and a half almost. That's crazy. That's as big as he was. His nose is as big as he was in real life. And so that's all we're going to learn about George Washington today. I do have a assignment we're going to do. We're going to color in George Washington's face, and I'm going to leave this picture up on the board so we know kind of what he looks like. He's got white hair, he's got rosy cheeks, so I'm going to have y'all draw him, and I have an outline for you. So, all right, let's get started.